Good morning, everyone. This is Julie McDonald with Microcom Technologies, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending the webinar with MetaGeek. Today's Crane. He is a technical geek, and he'll be presenting today. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them in the question box. I'll read them off to Joel, and he'll answer them at the end of today's presentation. Joel, thank you very much for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Packet analysis with IPA and the AirPCAP NX. In this webinar, I go through an introduction to how to perform wireless packet capture and how it can help you resolve wireless issues. And we're going to do that in a visual way to help you visualize what is actually going on in your wireless environment. Now, just a few things about me before we get started. My name is Joel, and I am the technical trainer at MetaGeek. I do things like teach webinars like this one, write training materials. Sometimes I teach our customers in person, which is pretty fun, and a whole bunch of other stuff. We all wear a lot of different hats here at MetaGeek. We do a lot of different things. So that's just so who you know who I am. As for MetaGeek, we're a small company based out of Boise, Idaho, and we're about 21 people. We just like to make easy to use wireless troubleshooting tools to help you figure out what's going on in your wireless environment. We've got a lot of material to cover today, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Before we can really get started and really dive into this packet analysis stuff, there's some Wi-Fi basics that we need to cover. There's some building blocks that we need to start with. And I do this every time I talk about Wi-Fi, and whenever I don't, I regret it, because ultimately there's just some key concepts here that you have to understand before you can really get what's going on with packet analysis in Wi-Fi. The first thing that you have to understand is that Wi-Fi is half-duplex. Now let's stop and think about what half-duplex means for a second. If you've ever worked with Ethernet, and I'm sure you have, an Ethernet cable has multiple twisted pairs of copper inside each cable. There's actually 4 pairs of copper, which means 8 wires in total in each Ethernet cable. And what that gives us is full duplex connectivity. Basically allows us to send traffic in 2 directions at the same time on the same Ethernet cable. Wi-Fi, on the other hand, is half duplex, which means we can only send traffic in 1 direction at a time. It's kind of like a human conversation. When you're talking to a friend, if you say something and your friend says something at the exact same time, you're not going to be able to understand each other. Only one of you can talk at a time, because you'll just drown out the other person, and neither of you will be able to understand what the other person said. Wi-Fi is the exact same way. In fact, Wi-Fi is kind of like a 1-lane highway where we can only send traffic east or west, but we can't send traffic east and west simultaneously. If we have an access point and we have a client device, and if they both try to talk at the same time on a channel, they're basically going to corrupt each other's signals, and they're not going to be able to understand each other. On any given channel at any given time, only one Wi-Fi device can talk. One Wi-Fi device talks at a time. So let's stop and take a look at what a typical wireless conversation looks like. Let's take a look at how they actually convey information back and forth. And what we're going to do is we're going to do that high-level overview now, and then we're going to dive into this really deep a little bit later on as we get deeper and deeper into this packet analysis stuff. So let's say that we've got an access point here, and we've got a client device, and they need to exchange some data. The first thing that's going to happen is, if the access point is transmitting, it's going to perform a clear channel assessment. It's going to listen to the channel to see if there's anything talking on the channel. And if there's nothing going on that channel, then the access point is going to take advantage of that, and it's going to transmit its data over to the laptop. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is the laptop is going to basically pull out the magnifying glass. It's going to take a look at that data that it just received to make sure that it understood the data. And if it understood the data that it just received, it'll go, yep, check, I understood the data, and it will reply with an acknowledgement, or just an ACK for short. So it's this constant process of sending data and receiving an acknowledgement, and sending data and receiving an acknowledgement. Now remember, the directions of the arrows here don't matter at all. We could flip them in the opposite directions. It works the exact same way. We can have the access point or the client device perform a clear channel assessment. We can have it transmit data to the access point. The access point will look at the data, and then it'll go, yep, check, I understood the data, and it will reply with the acknowledgement. It really doesn't matter which way the arrows are going. It's the exact same thing, no matter what direction the data is traveling in. Now, there's a couple of things that can go wrong here. And we're going to come back to these a little bit later on as we dig deeper into packet analysis. One thing that can go wrong is retries. Let's say that we've got the access point and it performs its clear channel assessment and it transmits some data to the laptop. Now, let's say that data gets corrupted before it gets there. The laptop just isn't able to understand that data. Maybe something else started talking in the middle of that access point's transmission. Maybe the laptop's just too far away and the signal just isn't good enough. But for whatever reason, let's say that the data gets corrupted before the laptop can receive it. When that happens, the laptop isn't going to understand the data that it just received, so it's not going to send its acknowledgement. The next thing that happens is the access point starts to go, okay, well, I just sent that laptop some data, but I never heard an acknowledgement back, so it must not have received the data. And so it's going to retransmit the data again and again and again and again. It's going to keep trying to retransmit that data until finally the data makes it through to the laptop, and the laptop can go, yep, check, I understood the data, and it can reply with an acknowledgement. Wi-Fi is a lot like my kids in this way. I've got 3 daughters, all under the age of 6, and the youngest one, she's 2. She's going to be 3 here in just a couple weeks, actually. And she's in that stage right now where she has many, many questions about everything. And so she'll ask me questions a lot about things, you know, is that your hat? And she'll just ask that. If I don't give her some kind of reply, she'll just ask over and over and over again, is that your hat? Is that your hat? Is that your hat? She'll ask over and over and over and over again until I finally give her some kind of response. And so I like to think that Wi-Fi is a lot like my 2 almost 3-year-old daughter in that way, and that she will repeat herself continually until she gets some kind of response. So if you've ever had kids, or if you've ever been around kids, or maybe if you've just seen some kids from a distance, you know that kids are a lot like Wi-Fi in that way. They will repeat themselves over and over and over again. Now, this half-duplex nature of Wi-Fi, it doesn't just apply to one access point and one client device. It applies to the entire channel. Let's say that we've got an Android phone here, and we've got a bunch of Android devices all connected to this access point, so they're all on the same channel. Let's say that this Android phone is currently transmitting some data to this access point. While that data transmission is occurring, all of these other devices on the channel have to be quiet and wait for their turn to talk. On any given channel at any given time, only one device can talk. And that includes the neighbors as well. A neighboring network that's on the same channel, all those client devices, all those access points, they're all going to take turns talking. Only one talks at a time. We also have to factor data rates into this as well. Wi-Fi is very unlike Ethernet in that data rates in Wi-Fi are very unstable. They're constantly changing. In fact, devices are just constantly switching which data rate they're using. The reason for this is that as signal strength goes down, we have to fall back to a slower and more robust data rate. When we're nice and close to an access point, we can talk really fast and move a lot of data through the air really, really quickly, right? But if we're far away from the access point, if the client device can't hear the access point very well, then we have to slow down and enunciate more to make sure that the access point and the client device can understand each other. So what comes along with this is literally how much time is taken up on the channel. Slower devices consume more airtime on the channel. So let's say that we've got an Android phone here. It's nice and close to the access point, so it's maintaining a nice fast data rate of 54 megabits per second. They're chatting back and forth at a nice quick data rate like 54 megabits per second. On the other hand, we have this other Android phone that's on the very, very fringe of the coverage cell. It's very, very far away from the access point, so it's still connected to the network. It's still associated, but it's having to talk very, very slowly. This device, since it's talking at 1 megabit per second, is going to talk 54 times slower than the device that's talking at 54 megabits per second. It's going to take this 1 megabit per second device 54 times longer to convey the same amount of information. So it consumes more time on the channel. I like to think of this guy as the slow kid in the back of the classroom. You guys know who I'm talking about, right? There's always that one person in the class, they raise their hand and they say, teach. I had a question about this particular topic, and you're just like, dude, come on, man, spit it out. Just, say what you need to say, and so that we can get on with the class. That is exactly what devices that have fallen back to slow data rates do to a channel. They consume more time on the channels. That's another thing that we need to watch out for. Now, there's three main types of interference in Wi-Fi, and we're not going to focus on a couple of these today, but it's important for you to understand that they're there. The first is co-channel interference. Co-channel interference occurs when we stack up a whole bunch of networks and client devices all on the same channel. A bunch of devices sharing a channel have to take turns talking. I like to think of it as kind of like a dinner table conversation. When you're all crowded around one dinner table, you all have to take turns. Now, if there's only a handful of people at the dinner table, it's no big deal. My wife and I, we had a couple friends over a couple weeks ago for dinner, and you know, usually we feed the kids first, then we send them out in the backyard to play so the adults can sit down and have a nice conversation. You know how that goes. And there were 4 of us around a dinner table, and when there's only 4 of us, there's plenty of time for all of us to talk. We can all say what we want to say. We can be involved in the conversation. But think about maybe back to Thanksgiving last year, or maybe last time you went to the in-laws' house, or last time you had a big family reunion or something like that, and you had a bunch of people around one dinner table all participating in one big conversation. When that happens, it's really hard to get a word in because there's a lot of people that want to participate in that conversation. That's exactly what co-channel interference does. As long as we don't have too much on the channel, everything works fine. But when we try to cram too many devices onto a channel, that's when we run into problems because we start to run out of airtime. The next type of interference is adjacent channel interference. Adjacent channel interference occurs when we have networks on partially overlapping channels. Now, in this scenario, instead of taking turns talking, all of these devices on channel 7 and all these devices on channel 5 and all the devices on channel 6, they're just going to yell and scream over each other, which is going to interrupt each other's data, which means they're going to have to retransmit, which is going to cause more airtime usage on those channels, which is going to cause the whole thing to spiral out of control. Now, 802.11 is very resilient. It actually does an amazing job of dealing with adjacent channel interference. But if we eliminate adjacent channel interference, if we always use channels 1, 6, and 11, if we eliminate that entirely, Wi-Fi would perform a lot better in the 2.4 gigahertz band. So be sure to always avoid adjacent channel interference. The next type of interference is non-Wi-Fi interference. And non-Wi-Fi devices, there's quite a few devices that operate in the 2.4 gigahertz band. Lots of consumer devices operate there in addition to Wi-Fi, and some stuff in the 5 gigahertz band as well. A big possibility is we're looking at LTE-U coming to the 5 gigahertz band, which is the cellular technologies being offloaded into the same frequency space as Wi-Fi. And that can be very problematic. If you want to learn more about non-Wi-Fi interference and what it can do to your network and how you can identify it and work around it or remove it, you'll want to check out our visual spectrum analysis webinar, which has been presented by MetaGeek and Microcom and is available on YouTube. So those are the 3 main types of interference. But today we're going to talk about co-channel interference. Packet analysis is best for troubleshooting co-channel interference because you can basically capture everything that's happening on that wireless channel, and then packet analysis will show us the details about 802.11 congestion on that specific channel. We can see all the activity from all the laptops, all the tablets, all the smartphones, and all the access points to see exactly what is going on that channel. I always like to start with the physical layer, meaning that I always like to start with spectrum analysis. Spectrum analysis is going to show us what our next step is going to be. It's going to guide us to the next step. So if we look at things with a spectrum analyzer, we're going to see one of 2 things. The first thing that we might see is a non-Wi-Fi signature. Like this is a classic 2.4 gigahertz cordless phone. And that's going to basically just wreck our wireless network. Any Wi-Fi devices that happen to be unfortunate enough to be on any of these channels are basically just going to stop transmitting because they're going to see that something else is already transmitting. And at that point, you're going to continue on with a spectrum analyzer, and that's looking at layer 1, that's the raw radio frequency activity, to identify and remove that non-Wi-Fi interference. The other thing that you might see, though, is you might see this, and this is actually what Wi-Fi looks like. This is a Wi-Fi signature, and based on the color that the spectrum analyzer is showing us, we can tell that that's causing heavy utilization on that channel. It's heavily utilizing that channel. That channel is being kept very, very busy by whatever is happening there. At that point, it's time to switch tools. It's time to switch to a packet analyzer and look at layer 2 to dig deeper into what is going on that channel to see why that channel is heavily congested with Wi-Fi. So that's when we are going to press on with a packet analysis tool. Here's kind of a comparison between what you see with spectrum analysis versus packet analysis. With a spectrum analyzer, it's going to show us the sum of all of the radio activity on that channel. If there's 2 Wi-Fi devices, then they're each causing 50% utilization on that channel, then with a spectrum analyzer, we'll see 100% utilization on that channel. Now, we can't tell those 2 devices apart. We just know that there are some devices or one device or more devices, and they are causing 100% utilization on that channel respectively. With a packet analyzer, we're going to be able to actually split that up. Instead of just looking at the raw radio frequency activity, we're actually going to be able to look at the data frames and the different packets that are flying around between devices, and we can actually see those conversations so we can get all the details about congestion on that specific channel by looking at layer 2. That's the big difference between spectrum analysis and packet analysis. As we dive deeper into this, the next thing that we need to do is we need to understand the different types of wireless frames that you'll see in the spectrum. Now, I've been calling it packet analysis the whole time. To be honest, they're not actually packets. They're actually frames. A packet is something that really more exists on an Ethernet network or another type of network. But in the wireless world, they're really actually called frames. So I may use those terms interchangeably. Most people do. Don't get hung up on it too much. But the reality is that technically they're wireless frames, not packets. But that's okay. It doesn't really matter in the end what you call them. Now, there's 3 different types of frames that we're going to go over. We're going to go over management frames, control frames, and data frames. Those 3 main types, and we'll dive deep into those. Now, if you forget what is what, in IPA, there is a cheat sheet built into the filters bar that'll help you understand what all the colors mean, what color refers to which type of frame, whether it be management frames, control frames, or data frames. And you can see all of their subframe types. I really like that there's basically just a cheat sheet built into the tool to help you remember which is which. Okay, so let's start out by looking at management frames. Management frames basically manage stations joining and leaving wireless networks. Basically, they help wireless devices get on and get off networks. There's 4 main types that we're going to cover. The first are beacons. A beacon is simply an access point announcing that it exists. Every 102.4 milliseconds or so, that's basically about 10 times a second, access points just say, hey, I'm Joel's network. I'm here. I support these data rates. I support this type of encryption. You can connect to me. Hey, I'm Joel's network. I'm here. I support these data rates. I support this type of encryption. You can connect to me. And they just do that over and over and over again. And that's there to help wireless devices discover access points. When you look at the wireless network list on your iPhone to see which networks are nearby, it's because of beacons. It's because your phone is detecting a bunch of beacons that are nearby. Now, the next type is kind of the opposite of a beacon. It's called a probe. Now, probes are interesting because they're almost exactly like beacons. They're just kind of in reverse. Let's say that you have connected to Joel's network before, and you've also connected to MetaGeek before. Your phone is going to remember those 2 profiles, and whenever it's looking for a network to connect to, it's going to look for any familiar networks. It's going to send out a probe request saying, hey, Joel's network, are you there? And if it doesn't hear anything, it'll move on to the next one. It'll say, hey, MetaGeek, are you there? And it'll do that over and over and over and over again until eventually it'll send out a probe request saying, hey, Joel's network, are you there? And then Joel's network will send a probe response. The probe response saying, yes, I'm Joel's network. I'm here. You can connect to me. That basically just makes it faster for us to connect to wireless networks. It helps devices proactively look for familiar wireless networks to connect to. Now, the next type of frame is an authentication frame. This one is kind of funny because the authentication frame actually goes back to the days of WEP, which stood for Wired Equivalent Protection. It was basically the first security mechanism that we had from Wi-Fi, and it's completely broken now. So authentication frames are basically just they're kind of a relic of days gone by. We don't really use them for anything anymore. There's two main types of authentication frames. And we basically use the variety that doesn't do anything now because we handle security later on in the association process. So authentication frames don't really do anything, but they happen every time we associate to a wireless network. And then, of course, there's finally association frames where we can send an association request and get an association response. At that point, we are now associated to the wireless network. So those are management frames which help you join and leave wireless networks. The next type of frame is a control frame. Control frames control the RF medium and they aid in the delivery of other types of frames. They make sure that other frames get delivered. The first type is an acknowledgement, or just an ACK for short. And I'll bet that you remember from the first part of this webinar where we talked about ACKs. We talked about how we send data and then we receive an acknowledgement. We go data, acknowledgement, data, acknowledgement. That is an ACK. Now, data and ACK works fine, but it also takes a lot of time. You know, if you were talking to a friend and they had to acknowledge that they understood everything you said, that takes a lot of time, right? So in order to improve things a little bit, with 802.11n came block acknowledgements. Now, block acknowledgements are cool because they basically allow us to acknowledge a bunch of data frames all at the same time. So instead of going data, acknowledgement, we can go data, 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 acknowledgement. Data, 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 acknowledgement. So we can acknowledge a bunch of data frames all at the same time. The next type is a request to send and a clear to send, RTS, CTS, request to send, clear to send. These help avoid hidden node problems. A hidden node problem occurs when you've got an access point that can hear two client devices, but those two client devices can't hear each other. So to illustrate this, it's time for some stick figures. We're going to draw some stick figures here on this slide. At our old MetaGeek office, we had we kind of had like a kitchen down here in the corner. It was kind of like this, and there was a doorway right there, and there was a countertop and a sink and a fridge and stuff. And MetaGeek takes good care of us here. They keep the fridge stocked with snacks and things like that. And then out here was the desk of our IT guy, Rich. So we'll just draw him right there. There's Rich sitting at his desk. And then over here at the sink, we had Lael. She's kind of our Swiss Army knife. She does a ton of stuff here at MetaGeek. It's hard to pin down exactly one thing. Right now, she's kind of handling a bunch of our sales stuff. And then standing here in the doorway was me. I was standing in the doorway. Now, Rich and Lael, they couldn't see each other, but they could both see me. And so out of the blue, in the middle of nowhere, they both started asking me a question at the exact same time. I mean, just simultaneously, they just, out of the blue, both asked me a question at the exact same time. And I had to go, whoa, 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 Rich, Lael, I can't understand both of you guys at once, one at a time. That is a hidden node problem. Now, what we could have done here to avoid this hidden node problem is we could have used RTS, CTS. If Rich had said, hey, Joel, can I ask you a question? And if I said, no, hang on, I'm talking to Lael, then he would have gone, oh, yeah. So he would have been able to wait. He would have been able to wait until I said, yes, Rich, what is your question? That would have given him a clear to send, so he would have known that it's okay to answer that question. So that's the one time at MetaGeek where we had a real life RTS, CTS, a real life hidden node problem right here in the office. The third type of frame that you'll see out there are data frames. And these, well, they carry higher level protocol data. These are the whole reason why we have a wireless network. And these are the only types of frames that actually carry packets. These carry packets, deliver them to the access point, and then the access point dumps the packet off onto the Ethernet side of the network where it goes on its merry way to its final destination. So that's data frames carry actual data. Now, there's three main types of frames. There's, a data frame, which is what it sounds like. It's a data frame. And then there is a quality of service data frame. Quality of service data frames basically have priority attached to them. If it's a voice over Wi-Fi frame, then we give that one much higher priority than if it's just, somebody browsing Facebook. We'll just call that a background or best effort frame. And so that way we can prioritize the voice over IP frame and get it delivered in a more consistent, timely manner. Now, null data frames, they're kind of funny. They're not actually data frames. Those are for things like power safe poles. They're not actually data. I think they just didn't know where else to put them, so they ended up getting put in this category. So a null data frame, not actually a data frame, but they are categorized as a data frame. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, this is the fun part. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because I'm a huge geek, is arbitration between wireless devices. How do wireless devices decide who gets to talk next? How do they determine who gets to transmit next? And well, they do it with this this process. So what we've got here is we've got a whole bunch of wireless stations. Now remember, a wireless station can be either an access point or a client. It doesn't really matter in this case. So we've just got a bunch of different stations here. We've got station 1, station 2, station 3, 4, 5, and 6. A bunch of different wireless stations here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move from left to right through time. So this is time. This is time on the y-axis here as we move across the page here. So let's go ahead and start out here with station 6. Here at the beginning of time in this process, station 6 is just finishing up receiving a data frame, and then there's a SIFS that stands for a short interframe space. It's basically a little breath between frames, right? So we just have a little bit of a breath there between frames. And then station 5 replies with an acknowledgement. So you see what just happened there. We had data, we had our acknowledgement, and they just finished up their little conversation that they were having over there. In the meantime, both station 4 and station 2 both need to transmit some data. They've both got some data data lined up there. They're ready to go. They need to transmit this data. So now we have a little 50 microsecond window here called a diffs. Basically, this little window right here signals to everyone, hey guys, there's an opportunity to talk here, so everybody get ready because you guys got to roll the dice and figure out who's going to get to talk next. So that little window tells them, oh, there might be a chance. I might get to talk here. So now they're both going to roll the dice at the same time, and then they're both going to count up to the number that they rolled. Whichever device gets to the end of its number that it rolled is just going to go ahead and start talking. So now station 4 rolled a 9 and station 2 rolled a 7. So now they're just going to count in unison. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now station 2 just went, okay, I counted a 7. Nobody started talking. It must be my turn to talk. So now it's going to transmit its request to send. Meanwhile, station 4 at the exact same time in unison counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Somebody started talking before me. So station 2 transmits its request to send, which tells station 4, hey, you don't get to talk yet. So now station 4 is going to defer, but remember, it rolled a 9 and it counted up to 7. So it's going to keep its back off counter, which is now 2. So now station 1 is going to reply with its clear to send. So we had our request to send, we had our clear to send, and now station 2 is going to transmit its data. Station 1 is going to reply with the acknowledgement, and we're done. They have finished up their little conversation. One thing that happened here is when we transmitted our request to send, everybody basically synchronizes their watches. They all set what's called a nav timer. They all synchronize their watches and go, okay, that device says it needs to transmit for this much time, and so they all just back off for that set amount of time, and that's called a nav timer or a network allocation vector. And so they're all going to back off for that little time slot. Okay, so now we're done with our conversation, and now it's time for the next round. We've got another round of diffs here, and so now we've all got the signal, ooh, there's another opportunity to talk coming up, so they all know that they're going to have another opportunity. Now remember, station 4 rolled a 9, got interrupted at 7, and so it has 2 back-off slots remaining. Meanwhile, station 2 has more data to send, so it's going to roll the dice again. This time, it rolled a 10. So you can see how station 4 is definitely getting some preference here. It's not a guarantee, but it is getting some preference that it's probably going to get to talk next. So it's going to count 1, 2, hey, nothing talked. So it's my turn to talk. So station 4 is going to immediately begin transmitting its data. And when that happens, station 2 is going to defer, and then it's going to set its nav timer and wait it out, wait until that conversation is done. Next time around, it's going to have 8 back-off slots remaining. So it won't have to count or wait as long next time. Then station 3 gives us the acknowledgement, and we're done. That's a wireless conversation. Crazy that it works at all, isn't it? I mean, it's just wild to me that this is happening millions of times per second. If your phone is in your pocket right now with Wi-Fi turned on, it's doing this. Even beacons, even when devices just say, hey, I'm Joel's network, I'm here, they have to look for an available spot of airtime to transmit that beacon. It's all about finding an available slot of time to work in. So how do we visualize this? Well, kind of the old way of doing this is with Wireshark. Now, don't get me wrong here. We love Wireshark. Wireshark is a free open source tool. If you don't have it, you should go get it today. That it's an amazing and very versatile packet analysis tool. But the problem with Wireshark is that it just basically dumps all of the packets into a giant list and just lists them by the order that they happened in. And that makes it very difficult to visualize airtime usage. It's tough to know who talked fast and who talked slow and who's repeating themselves all the time. It's very difficult to know exactly what happened during the course of the packet capture. And so we came up with a solution for that, and it's called IPA. IPA stands for I Packet Analysis because it's a visual packet analysis tool. It actually shows you what happened in graphical chart-based form. And we use these cool charts called trees or multi-layered pie charts, and they show information in layers. So before I get into the live demo of IPA, which we're going to jump into here in a second, before we do that, I want to break down these multi-layered pie charts to help you understand exactly what they mean. Now, the whole chart shows us the total amount of airtime that was used on the channel. So that's the total amount of time that we ended up using on the channel during the packet capture. The next thing is we break this up into multiple layers. The innermost layer represents our wireless network. Now we can see here that we've got this network here called Bronco Guest, and it's used up about 2/3 of the total amount of airtime that was used on this channel. So that network used up about 2/3. We go one more layer out, and now we're looking at the individual access points. Now here we can see the hover's kind of obscuring it just a little bit, but we can see there's at least 2 separate access points that are part of Bronco Guest that we heard on this channel. One of them took up about half the airtime on the channel, and this one over here took up, I'm going to say it's about 1/8 of the airtime on the channel. So you can see which access points were responsible for the majority of the traffic on that channel, the majority of airtime that was used. We go one more layer out, and now we're looking at individual client devices. So we've got a client device here. We've got another client device here that didn't talk very much at all. This one used up about 1/3 of the airtime. This one used up about 1/8 of the airtime. And then as we get on further here, we can see a lot of different clients use little tiny slices of airtime. So we can see how much time each client device took up. The outermost ring shows us what is management overhead and what is actual data. It shows us the frame type or the subframe type. So if we look at the color tells us what frame type it was. For example, all the orange, that's all control frames. All of the purple, that's all management frames. And all of the blue, that's actual data. So we can see exactly how much time was spent on actual data, like all this blue right here, versus management overhead, which is all of this orange right here. So you can see how much is management overhead and how much is actual data. So let's go ahead and jump into a demo of IPA. I'm a little bored of slides. Maybe you are too. So let's go ahead and do a live demo here. And the things I want to show you is that here's some things that IPA is really good at. It's really great at identifying top talkers. It's great at identifying devices that are having slow and inefficient conversations at slow data rates. And you can see what devices are transmitting and receiving the most data. You can also use to identify problem devices. If there's a slowed conversation that's consuming airtime, you can pinpoint that. And it automatically points out devices that repeat themselves constantly to help you see if maybe there's a chipset problem or a signal strength problem or something like that. It'll give you expert tips so you can automatically see those clients with excessive retries, and you can identify network settings that can hurt performance. You can also export anything to Wireshark. Like we said, we love Wireshark, and so we were able to maintain complete compatibility with Wireshark in IPA. Okay, so we've got our IPA up and running here, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a sample packet capture. This is actually included with IPA. This packet capture is kind of fun because we were at a trade show, and there was a vendor there that was streaming video to 100 iPads concurrently. And we thought, wow, trade show Wi-Fi is usually a nightmare and just a huge mess. How are they streaming video to 100 iPads at the same time? So we had to get a packet capture to see what was going on. And we found some very interesting things in this packet capture. So first, let's take a look at the airtime graph. If we look at all of the airtime that was used on this channel, it's almost 100% all used by this network called iPad Demo 6. I'm going to say that might be the network that's streaming video to the iPads. Now, there were a couple of outliers here. Let's see, we had Voice WLAN 2. They used a tiny slice of airtime. And then we saw HP Blogger N. So we had a handful of other networks here, but not much, and they did not use a significant amount of airtime. Now, so that's the centermost ring. If we go one more layer out, now we can see that it was one access point on this channel. Looks like it's on channel 52, so we're in the 5 gigahertz band. We had a total retry rate of 24%. Not bad. That's pretty good. You know, we're not repeating ourselves too often. Once we crest about 30%, then I start to worry a little bit. If we go one more layer out, now we can see those individual iPads, and we can see how much airtime each one of those iPads used up. So we can instantly see what their individual retry rates, like this one had a pretty high retry rate of 38%, whereas this iPad only had a retry rate of 22%. So it's pretty easy for us to tell the performance of these individual devices. Now, another thing that we can do is we can click on these to drill down into them. Any of these layers can be clicked on. So I'm going to click on this Apple device to see exactly what happened. Now we looked over here, we can see the channel, we can see the retry rate. If we hover our mouse here, we can see that it used a data rate of 6 megabits per second, about 48% of the time. But then about 25% of the time, we were able to hit 58 megabits per second. We can also see in this graph up here, we can see when this device talked. Now, the gray, this graph up here is called the airtime over time graph. So basically, it's showing us the breakdown of airtime usage over this entire recording. So the gray indicates anything that talked on the channel. The green indicates what we are currently filtered down to or drilled down into, whether we applied filters with the filter bar up here, or whether we just clicked on stuff with the multi-layered pie charts down here, doesn't matter. It all works the same. It's all going to help us filter down to what's happening. We can see that this iPad buffered some data here towards the beginning of the capture. Then it had a pretty big lull here where nothing happened. And then it buffered some more data here. And then it was basically quiet for the rest of the packet capture. Really nothing else happened for the rest of that packet capture. So if we, let's drill back out a little bit. I'm just going to go back up one more level. Let's go take a look at a different iPad, maybe this iPad. Just pick an iPad. This particular iPad buffered its data later in the packet capture. Let's back out again. Let's go take a look at a different iPad. Maybe, oh, that's the same one I chose last time. Maybe this iPad. This one buffered its data here in the center. So you can actually see when devices did their thing, when did they actually move that data across the air. The next thing that we can do with this tool that I really, really like is we can visit the packets view. Now, this is going to be kind of similar to Wireshark in that this is going to basically just show you a list of all the packets. But there's some cool things that we can do here. We can drill down into a specific a conversation by clicking on any of these client devices. So if we click on this one, now we're actually drilled down specifically into this conversation between these two devices. Now, there's multiple ways we can do that. You can filter down by SSID or access point vendor. You could filter down to client vendor. So for example, if I start typing Apple here, we could filter down to just Apple devices. You could filter to MAC address, data rate, signal strength, and then here's that cheat sheet that I told you about earlier where we can show and unshow various types of frames. But we can actually see this wireless conversation unfolding right here in front of us. For example, we can see that we have a bunch of quality of service data frames here. So we went data, 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 acknowledgement. Now, for some reason, it sounds like it looks to me that the access point never received that acknowledgement. That the acknowledgement must have gotten mixed up in the air somewhere. So we actually had to retransmit those frames, and then we sent our block acknowledgement again. Then we had a request to send and a clear to send and some data and an acknowledgement and some data and an acknowledgement and then a request to send and a clear to send and then some data flowing back and forth. You can very clearly see what's going on in the packet capture by just simply looking at the packets. And that can really help you drill down into some issues and figure out exactly what is going on. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to do a live packet capture. So I've got my trusty old Android tablet here. This is my good old 2012 Nexus 7. She's getting a bit older now, but it still works well. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to perform an iPerf test on our local network, and I'm performing this packet capture with the AirPCAP NX. So now we're capturing some packets here. You can see the file size is slowly marching up here, just above a megabyte. And I'm going to go ahead and start this iPerf throughput test. And this is a very simple test. I've just got iPerf running on a Raspberry Pi over by my desk, and I'm just running iPerf. So we're transmitting some data across the air right now. This is about a 30-second test. We've been running for about 30 seconds now. You can see we've captured about 15,000, 16,000 packets, and we've seen about 2,400 invalid packets. That's okay. We're not going to understand every single packet that we received. And so, okay, looks like we're done with our throughput test. So now I'm going to go ahead and stop the packet capture, and IPA is going to do a bunch of heavy lifting right now. It's going to crunch all those numbers and figure out who talked fast, who talked slow, and who was repeating themselves, and it's going to get this data all ready for us to make it easy to navigate. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened on this packet capture, and hopefully the demo gods will smile down upon us, and it's all going to work well and be a good example. So we can see we've got MetaGeek here, we've got another network called Direct, a bunch of stuff. We've got Astral here, we've got Owyhee Management, that's the building that we're in. And then we've got a few other networks here that, there's MetaGeek Console. It's one of the access points over in my lab. A10, a few other businesses around us. So we can see that we are responsible for about a third of the airtime that was used on this channel. So now, if we look at MetaGeek, we go one more layer out. We only see one access point on this channel. That's a good thing. We don't want to see more than one of our own APs on a channel at a time. We want to effectively reuse our channels and not have two APs on the same channel. We go one more layer out, and there's this ASUS device here. Well, my Nexus 7 was manufactured by ASUS. That's probably my device. If we look on the outermost ring here, we can see that our retry rate was about 7%. And we averaged about 63.5 megabits per second. That's about our average. So now, let's take a look at what kind of data rates we hit. We saw 24 megabits per second pretty often, about 50% of the time. 24 megabits per second is a really, it's a nice balance between speed and it's also very robust. It's a good, robust data rate. And then we also saw some 65 megabits per second, which is the fastest data rate that we're going to hit with this device. So we can see exactly what happened. We also had some block acknowledgements, some RTS, and some CTS. If we click on this to drill down into it, we can go to the Packets tab and we can see that conversation unfolding. Another thing I wanted to show you is I wanted to point out how much airtime it takes just to beacon, just how much airtime just beaconing for a network takes up. We can see that Astral here took up, I think this sits about 16th or an 8th, something like that. They took up a ton of airtime with just beacons. Look at all this. This is just beacons. So one thing to keep in mind is that if you have a wireless network with virtual SSIDs, keep it below 4 virtual SSIDs because there's some danger there of eating up all of your own airtime just by having multiple SSIDs that each introduce their own management overhead. If we go to the Analyze tab, that's going to give us some, on this tab we can go in and star a specific network to get some expert tips on this network. For example, on the MetaGeek network here, we're actually seeing some legacy data rates here, and you can hit Learn More, and if you don't want to read that, you can hit Too Long Didn't Read to hide it again. But we saw legacy data rates, and we have a solution for that. We also saw legacy protection mechanism and a solution for that as well. And we noticed that there was a couple of client devices here that have excessive retries, and so we're calling those out by MAC address, and there's some suggestions on how to deal with that problem, like maybe investigating Wi-Fi chipset issues. Now, let's say that you've got these packets and you want to get them out of IPA to take a deeper look in Wireshark. Let's go ahead and just apply some filters here. So I'm just going to filter down to MetaGeek. I'm going to filter down to, let's filter down to ASUS, so we'll just get that ASUS device. And then let's go ahead and let's take out, just for fun, we'll take out all the RTS, CTS. So we'll just get rid of RTS. We'll get rid of CTS. So now those are taken out of that capture, and then we can just go File and click Send to Wireshark. And what that's going to do is it's going to basically tie a bow around all those packets. It's going to wrap them all up and send them over to Wireshark for deeper analysis, so you can get a there's a new version of Wireshark, so that you can get a deeper look into those packets to see exactly what is going on. So it turns IPA into a really powerful, really great filtering tool, which is just one of my favorite things about it. Now, getting packet captures is a bit of a tricky thing. We support the AirPCAP NX. This is a product by Riverbed that we resell with IPA. It works in both the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz bands. It's a 2x2 802.11 ABGN device, and it captures directly into IPA. The other way you can do this is with Mac OS. Mac OS will do native packet capture. My favorite way to do it right now is with a tool by our good friend Adrian Granados. He wrote a free tool called Airtool. I'll link you to that later here on the next slide. But you can get packet captures with a MacBook, and then you can just move those over to your Windows machine or move them into a Windows virtual machine where you're running IPA. And some other sources that are completely experimental are, if you're savvy with Linux, if you're pretty good with the command line, and if you have a Wi-Fi adapter that you can put in monitor mode, you can do it in Linux. You can also do it with some enterprise-grade APs. It's tricky, but it can be done. So there's multiple ways to get packet captures into IPA. And of course, IPA supports 802.11ac. All right, so now I'd like to hand it back over to Julie really quick before I do that. If you'd like to grab the Wireshark color profile that I was using, that makes Wireshark show everything in the same colors as IPA, then you can grab that right here. And if you'd like to grab Airtool for macOS, head over to Adrian's website and grab a copy. Maybe drop him $1 or $2 for his efforts, because it really is a wonderful tool. And with that, Julie.
Thank you very much, Joel, for your wonderful presentation. We very much enjoyed it. It looks like we do have a few questions for you. Let me go ahead and start off with the first one. Let's see, here we go. Will the spectrum analyzer work with both the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz band?
Yes, it will. So that's a separate webinar, but still a great question nonetheless. We sell we manufacture and sell the WiSpy DBX, and that works with our Channelizer software. And DB stands for dual band. I worked at MetaGeek for a long time before I knew that. And so that works on both the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands. It works great.
Thank you very much for that. Let's see, next question. Does MetaGeek have any challenges with not being able to read Wi-Fi from certain devices?
Yeah, there are some challenges out there. In fact, some challenges that I think everybody is dealing with. One thing that the AirPCAP doesn't do is it doesn't support a short guard interval. So that's just one thing that the AirPCAP just plain doesn't do. So if you need to capture on a network using a short guard interval, then use my recommendation is just pick up a MacBook. You know, you could pick up a used MacBook Air for a few $100, and that'll be a great packet capture device. The other one that's tricky is a new thing out there is multi-user MIMO with 802.11ac Wave 2. There is literally no way to capture multi-user MIMO packets right now that I know of at all. So basically, once multi-user MIMO transmissions begin, basically the air just kind of goes silent. So that's a bit of a problem. But the silver lining of that is that multi-user MIMO is not that prevalent. I have yet to really see it really take off and catch hold. For the majority of our customers, it's not a problem.
Thank you for that, Joel. Next question. Should MetaGeek be in the truck of surveillance installers as well?
Yeah, if you're installing surveillance equipment, I think that especially our Channelizer plus WiSpy software, I think is especially advantageous because it can help you see what's going on in the whole spectrum. It kind of help you perform some spectrum planning. So if you've got AV equipment or if you've got security system equipment that's operating in the 2.4 or 5 gigahertz bands, I strongly encourage you to check out the Channelizer plus WiSpy product. Microcom's YouTube channel has a recorded webinar taught by yours truly that you can go watch to learn more about that.
Thank you for that, Joel. And this one will be on YouTube as well.
Perfect.
I think I got a last question here for you. Do devices as small as Wi-Fi watches, photo frames, remote controls, and phones cause interference?
Absolutely. They're all Wi-Fi devices. They all talk the same way. They do the exact same things that your MacBook Pro does or your phone does. You can buy Wi-Fi chipsets now that are about the size of your fingernail for about $1. I mean, $1. You can buy a Wi-Fi chipset now. Obviously, it needs like a computer on this. It needs some more electronics to actually do something. But the chipset itself is insanely small. They're all the same thing, whether it's an Apple Watch or a wireless video camera or a MacBook Pro or I don't know, what's the Apple Home thing? I forget what it's called actually. Google Home, all those things. They're all Wi-Fi. They're all going to cause the same types of interference for each other. Fortunately, when everything in your environment is Wi-Fi, they are going to arbitrate for airtime like we talked about in the webinar.
Joel, thank you very much for answering those questions, and also thank you to everyone for attending today. If you have any more questions, please feel free to contact your sales rep, or you can email us at sales@microcomtech.com. And if you wish to view any of the products mentioned or shown today, please visit us at www.microcom.us. And remember, this webinar presentation has been recorded, and it will be uploaded to our Microcom YouTube channel. So if you'd like to view it again, you can do so on YouTube. Thank you, Joel, very much for today's presentation. We appreciate it, and everyone enjoyed it very much. Wonderful day, everybody.